The sun over Bitter Creek didn't just shine, it punished. Heat rose from the trampled ground in waves thick enough to choke on, turning the air into something that had to be fought for with every breath. In the center of that dust-choked clearing stood a woman whose spine refused to bend even as iron shackles bit into her wrists. Shania's skin bore the grime of weeks spent in captivity. Her doeskin dress torn at the shoulder, but her eyes, dark as midnight water, held a defiance that made grown men look away. Harlan Grimes yanked the chain attached to her wrists, his tobacco-stained grin spreading wide as he called out prices like he was hawking livestock at a county fair. A few trappers laughed, their voices cruel and careless. Others fingered their coin pouches, weighing the value of flesh against silver. The trading post behind them sagged under years of neglect, its windows filmed with grit, its porch littered with broken whiskey bottles and the bones of forgotten meals. Then a voice cut through the heat and the haggling, calm as steel drawn slow from its sheath. $50. Every head turned. The man who spoke, Clay Stryker, stood apart from the others, boots planted firm in the dust, hat pulled low enough to shadow his eyes, but not the hard line of his jaw. He didn't look like the kind of man who traded in human cargo. He looked like someone who had seen too much of the world's ugliness and learned to meet it head-on without flinching. Harlan's eyes gleamed with greed as he shoved Shania forward, chains rattling like bones in a dry wind. Clay caught her by the elbow before she stumbled, his grip firm but not cruel. She jerked away the moment she found her balance, lifting her chin to meet his gaze with a stare that could have cut glass. "You bought my flesh, stranger," she said, her voice low and edged with scorn. "But I submit to no gold." The clearing went silent. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if the land itself was holding its breath to hear what came next. Clay released her arm slowly, making sure she saw every deliberate movement. "I didn't buy you," he said quietly, his words meant only for her. "I bought your freedom from him." He tilted his head toward Harlan, who was already counting coins with fingers that trembled from too much drink and not enough conscience. Shania's eyes narrowed, distrust carved deep into every line of her face. She had heard promises before, from men who smiled with one mouth and lied with another. Harlan spat into the dirt, his grin never faltering as he pocketed Clay's money. "She's all yours, Stryker. Good luck keeping her. That one's got more fight in her than a cornered wildcat." He laughed, a wet, rasping sound, and turned away without a second glance. Already moving toward the next transaction, the next coin, the next piece of someone's soul he could sell. Clay watched him go, then looked back at Shania. She stood perfectly still, chains hanging from her wrists like the weight of every injustice she had ever endured. Her breathing was controlled, but he could see the tension coiled in her shoulders, the way her fingers flexed as if she were imagining what it would feel like to wrap them around Harlan's throat. Clay reached for the lock on her shackles, moving slowly enough that she could step back if she wanted to. She didn't move, but her eyes tracked his hands with the vigilance of a hawk watching a predator. The lock clicked open. The chains fell away, hitting the ground with a dull thud that seemed louder than it should have been. Shania stared down at her freed wrists, at the raw, angry marks the iron had left behind. For a moment, something flickered across her face, too quick to name, gone before it could be called relief or gratitude. She rubbed her wrists slowly, as if testing whether freedom was real or just another shape her captivity had taken. "There's a stream 2 miles north," Clay said, keeping his voice even, unthreatening. "You can wash there if you want. After that, the choice is yours. Stay go, whatever you decide." He turned toward his horse, a sturdy roan mare with patient eyes, and began checking the saddle straps. Behind him, he could feel Shania's gaze boring into his back, weighing him, measuring whether his words held truth or just another kind of trap she didn't follow immediately. Instead, she looked around the clearing, at the men still gathered near the trading post, at the endless stretch of scrubland that surrounded Bitter Creek like a noose. There was nowhere to run that didn't lead to more danger, more men like Harlan, more chains that came in different shapes. Her jaw tightened. She had survived worse than uncertainty. She would survive this too. Finally, she moved, her steps deliberate and wary, keeping enough distance between herself and Clay that she could react if he turned on her. He didn't turn. He simply mounted his horse and waited, reins loose in his hands, giving her the space to make her own choice. After a long moment, Shania began walking north, toward the stream he had mentioned, and Clay nudged his mare forward, following at a pace that matched hers. Neither leading nor herding, just present. The land between Bitter Creek and Clay's ranch stretched out in shades of gold and gray. A vast expanse of prairie grass, broken only by clusters of cottonwood trees, and the occasional ridge of redstone jutting up like broken teeth. The sky overhead was a pale, washed-out blue, the kind of sky that offered no mercy and no shade, just an endless expanse that made a person feel small and exposed. Shania walked with the steady rhythm of someone who had learned to cover ground without wasting energy, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon for threats. Clay rode a dozen yards behind her, close enough to offer protection if danger appeared, far enough away that she wouldn't feel hunted. He had seen women in her situation before, bought out of desperation or cruelty, their spirits either broken or hardened into something sharp and unyielding. Shania was the latter. Every line of her body spoke of resilience earned through suffering, of a will that refused to be bent, no matter how many times the world tried to break it. They reached the stream as the sun climbed higher, turning the water into a ribbon of molten silver cutting through the dry earth. Cottonwoods grew thick along the banks, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind. Shania stopped at the water's edge, her gaze sweeping the area before she knelt down, cupping her hands to drink. Clay dismounted and led his mare to a spot upstream, giving Shania her privacy, his back turned as he let the horse drink her fill. The water was cold and clean, fed by springs deep in the hills. Shania drank until her throat no longer felt like it was lined with dust, then splashed water over her face and arms, scrubbing away the layers of grime that clung to her skin. The raw marks on her wrists stung when the water touched them, but she welcomed the pain. It reminded her that she was still alive, still herself, still capable of feeling something other than rage and fear. When she finally stood, water dripping from her hair and hands, she found Clay sitting beneath a cottonwood tree, his hat resting on his knee, his gaze fixed on the middle distance. He wasn't watching her, wasn't waiting for her to finish so he could make demands or lay claim to what he thought he had purchased. He was just sitting, as if he had all the time in the world and nothing to prove. It unsettled her more than aggression would have. Why? She asked, her voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. Clay looked up, his expression unreadable. "Why what?" He replied. Shania stepped closer, her wet hair clinging to her shoulders, her eyes searching his face for the lie she was certain must be hiding there. "Why pay gold for something you claim you do not want to own?" Her accent shaped the words differently, each syllable carrying the cadence of her people's tongue beneath the English. Clay stood slowly, brushing dust from his trousers. "Because Harlan Grimes would have sold you to someone worse," he said simply. "And I've seen enough of what men like that do to people when no one stops them." There was no pride in his voice, no expectation of gratitude. Just a weariness that suggested he had made choices like this before, and paid for them in ways that didn't show on the surface. Shania studied him for a long moment, her distrust warring with something else. Something that felt dangerously close to hope, and therefore had to be crushed before it could take root. "Men do not act without want," she said flatly. "You will expect payment." "They always do." Clay met her gaze without flinching. "I expect nothing," he said. "But if you want to repay me, stay alive. That's enough." The words hung in the air between them, stark and honest in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. Shania's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to push back against the kindness that felt too fragile to trust, but the exhaustion of weeks spent in captivity suddenly crashed over her like a wave. Her knees threatened to buckle. She locked them, refusing to show weakness, but Clay saw it anyway. "There's food in my saddlebag," he said, turning back toward his horse. "Dried beef and cornbread. Not much, but it'll keep you going until we reach the ranch." He retrieved a cloth-wrapped bundle and set it on a flat rock near the stream, then stepped back, giving her space. Shania approached the food slowly, as if it might vanish if she moved too quickly. When she unwrapped it and saw fee simple fare inside, her stomach clenched with hunger so fierce it made her hands shake. She ate slowly, forcing herself to chew and swallow despite the urge to devour everything at once. Clay didn't watch her eat. He busied himself with checking his horse's hooves, adjusting the saddle, doing small tasks that gave her privacy without abandoning her. It was a kindness she didn't know what to do with, so she ignored it and focused on the food. On the way it filled the hollow ache in her belly. On the small mercy of sustenance, when she finished, she folded the cloth carefully and set it back on the rock. Clay glanced over, nodded once, and said, "We should keep moving. Still a few miles to go, and the sun won't wait for us." Shania stood, brushing crumbs from her hands. She still didn't trust him, but she was beginning to believe that he might not be like the others. It was a dangerous thing to believe. But she was too tired to fight it anymore. They continued north, the land rising gradually into low hills covered in scrub, oak and wild grasses that swayed in the wind like an ocean frozen in shades of gold. Clay's ranch came into view just as the sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon. It wasn't much, just a sturdy cabin built from rough-hewn timber, a small barn, and a corral that held 3 horses and a mule. The land around it was marked by hard work, fences mended with care, a vegetable garden struggling against the dry soil, a well with a bucket sitting on its stone rim. Shania stopped at the edge of the property, her instincts screaming at her to run, to disappear into the hills before she became trapped again. But where would she go? Her people were scattered, driven from their lands by soldiers and settlers who saw them as obstacles to be removed. She had no family left, no tribe to return to. She was alone in a world that wanted her dead or bound. And this stranger with his quiet voice and careful hands was offering her something she hadn't had in months. A choice. Clay dismounted and turned to face her, his expression patient. "You can sleep in the barn if the cabin feels too closed in," he said. "There's hay, blankets, and it's dry. No one will bother you there." Shania looked at the barn, then at the cabin, then back at Clay. His face was weathered and lined, the face of a man who had known hardship and carried it without complaint. There was no hunger in his eyes when he looked at her, no possessive gleam, just a tired kind of decency that felt almost foreign. "I will take the barn," she said finally, her voice firm. Clay nodded. "Fair enough. I'll bring you water and something hot to eat once I get the fire going." He led his horse toward the corral, leaving Shania standing alone in the fading light. She watched him for a moment, then turned and walked toward the barn, her steps slow but steady. Inside, she found exactly what he had promised: clean hay stacked in one corner, wool blankets folded neatly on a wooden crate, and the comforting smell of horses and old leather. She sank down onto the hay, her body finally allowing itself to feel the weight of everything she had endured. Her hands trembled as she pulled a blanket around her shoulders. Outside, she could hear Clay moving around, the clank of a bucket, the creak of the cabin door, the low murmur of his voice as he spoke to his animals. It was the sound of a life lived quietly, without cruelty, without the sharp edges that had defined her existence for too long. For the first time in months, Shania allowed herself to close her eyes without fear that she would wake to chains or worse. The exhaustion pulled her down into darkness, and she let it, trusting, against every instinct, that when she woke, the world might be just a little less hostile than it had been before. Morning arrived with the smell of smoke and coffee drifting through the cracks in the barn walls. Shania woke with a start, her body coiled tight before her mind caught up to remind her where she was. No chains, no Harlan Grimes leering through the darkness. Just hay beneath her back and the soft snorting of horses in nearby stalls. She sat up slowly, pushing the blanket aside, and listened to the sounds of clay moving around outside. The rhythmic thunk of an axe splitting wood, the creak of the well rope, the clatter of a tin cup against stone. She rose and moved to the barn door, peering out through a gap in the weathered boards. Clay stood near the cabin with his sleeves rolled up, stacking split logs against the outer wall. His movements were efficient, practiced, the motions of a man who had done this work 1,000 times and would do it 1,000 more without complaint. Sweat darkened his shirt between his shoulder blades despite the cool morning air. He paused to wipe his brow with his forearm, then returned to his task without looking toward the barn. Shania stepped outside, her bare feet silent on the packed earth. The world was painted in shades of gray and gold, the sun just beginning to crest the eastern hills, casting long shadows across the ranch. The air tasted clean, touched with the sharpness of pine and the mineral scent of stone. It was nothing like the suffocating closeness of Harlan's camp, where the air had always carried the stench of unwashed bodies and desperation. Clay noticed her and straightened, setting the axe aside. "There's water in the basin by the door," he said, gesturing toward the cabin. "And coffee, if you want it. I made extra." He didn't smile, didn't try to soften his words with false warmth, just stated facts and left her to decide what to do with them. Shania nodded once and moved toward the cabin, her eyes sweeping the yard, cataloging exits, places to hide, angles of approach. Old habits died hard. Inside the cabin, light filtered through 2 small windows, illuminating a space that was sparse but clean. A table made from pine planks, 2 chairs, a cast iron stove radiating heat, shelves lined with tin cans and burlap sacks of grain. No decoration, no softness, just the bare necessities of survival arranged with care. A tin basin sat on a bench near the door, filled with water that was cold enough to sting when Shania splashed it on her face. She scrubbed her skin roughly, washing away the last traces of sleep and the lingering sense of vulnerability that came with it. The coffee was strong and bitter, brewed in a dented pot that had seen better days. Shania wrapped her hands around the warm cup and drank slowly, standing near the window where she could watch Clay continue his work. He moved with the steady patience of someone who understood that hard work was never finished, only paused. There was no hurry in him, no restless energy demanding attention or validation. It was unsettling in its simplicity. She set the empty cup down and stepped back outside. Clay had finished stacking wood and was now walking toward the corral, a bucket of feed in one hand. The horses lifted their heads as he approached, nickering softly in greeting. Shania followed at a distance, keeping to the periphery, watching as he poured grain into a trough and ran his hand along the neck of a bay gelding with white stockings. The animal leaned into his touch, eyes half closed in contentment. "They trust you," Shania said, the words coming out before she could stop them. Clay glanced over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. "I feed them regular and don't beat them," he replied. "Doesn't take much more than that to earn trust from a horse." He straightened and turned to face her fully. "People are harder. They remember every hurt, every broken promise. Can't blame them for it." Shania stepped closer to the corral fence, her fingers curling around the rough wood. "You speak as one who has been hurt," she observed. Clay's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a flicker of something dark crossing his face before he smoothed it away. "Everyone's been hurt," he said. "Question is whether you let it turn you mean or just careful." He moved past her toward the barn, leaving the words hanging in the air like smoke. She watched him disappear into the shadowed interior, then turned her attention back to the horses. The bay gelding approached the fence, nostrils flaring as he sniffed her outstretched hand. Shania held perfectly still, letting the animal make the choice. After a moment, he lipped at her palm, searching for treats he wouldn't find. His breath was warm and sweet, smelling of hay and grain. Something in her chest loosened, just a fraction, just enough to let a single breath come easier. Clay emerged from the barn carrying a saddle, which he slung over the corral fence. "I need to ride out and check the fence line along the northern pasture," he said. "Had some trouble with coyotes last week, and I want to make sure they haven't found a way through. You're welcome to come along if you want, or stay here. Either way, there's bread and dried apples in the cabin if you get hungry." He began checking the saddle's girth strap. His hands moving with practiced efficiency, Shania considered refusing. Considered retreating back to the barn where she could maintain the illusion of separation and control. But staying alone meant being trapped with her thoughts, with memories of everything Harlan had stolen from her, with the gnawing fear that this fragile piece was just another cruel trick waiting to reveal its true face. At least if she went with Clay, she could keep watch, maintain her vigilance, ensure she wasn't walking into another trap. "I will come," she said. Clay nodded and gestured toward a smaller saddle hanging inside the barn. "That one belonged to my sister," he said. "She's been gone 5 years now, married to a preacher over in Abilene. Haven't seen her since the wedding, but she left some of her things here. Saddle should fit you well enough." He retrieved it and brought it to the corral, where he saddled a dappled gray mare with gentle hands. Shania took the reins when he offered them, her fingers testing the leather's strength, the horse's responsiveness. The mare stood calm and patient, ears swiveling to catch every sound. Shania mounted in one smooth motion, her body remembering skills learned in childhood, when her father had lifted her onto her first pony and taught her that a Comanche rode as naturally as they breathed. Clay watched her settle into the saddle, something like respect flickering in his eyes, before he turned to mount his own horse. They rode north across land that rolled and dipped like frozen waves, covered in buffalo grass that whispered beneath the horse's hooves. The sun climbed higher, warming Shania's back through the thin fabric of her dress. She rode slightly behind and to the left of Clay, close enough to hear him if he spoke, far enough to maintain her own space. He didn't fill the silence with empty words, didn't try to pry into her past or demand gratitude for his actions. He simply rode, his attention on the land, reading it the way her people had once read the plains. They reached the fence line after an hour of steady riding. The post stood weathered and worn, strung with barbed wire that gleamed dully in the sunlight. Clay dismounted and began walking the length of the fence, his eyes scanning for breaks or weaknesses. Shania stayed mounted, her gaze sweeping the surrounding terrain. Old instincts alert for movement, for danger, for anything that didn't belong. Clay stopped near a section where the wire sagged, the post tilted at an angle. He crouched down, examining the ground around it, his fingers tracing marks in the dirt. "Coyotes tried to dig under here," he said, more to himself than to her. "Didn't make it through, but they'll try again if I don't reinforce it." He straightened and walked back to his horse, retrieving tools from his saddlebag, a hammer, nails, an extra coil of wire. Shania dismounted and approached, watching as he worked to reset the post, driving it deeper into the hard earth with methodical strikes of the hammer. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but he didn't pause or complain, just kept working until the post stood straight and true. When he began restringing the wire, Shania stepped forward without being asked and held the coil steady, feeding him length as he needed it. Their hands brushed once when he reached for more wire, and Clay pulled back immediately, giving her space. The gesture was so automatic, so ingrained, that it told her more than words could have. This was a man who understood boundaries, who had learned to move carefully around wounded things. She met his eyes briefly, seeing in them a reflection of something she recognized, the wary caution of someone who had been burned and learned to guard the flame. They worked in silence until the fence was secured, then remounted and continued along the line, checking each section with the same patient thoroughness. The land around them stretched endlessly, marked only by the occasional cottonwood or outcropping of red stone. Hawks circled overhead, their cries sharp and lonely. A jackrabbit bolted from a clump of sage, zigzagging across the open ground before disappearing into a wash. As they rode, Shania found herself studying Clay more openly, trying to piece together the puzzle of who this man was and why he moved through the world the way he did. His hands on the reins were scarred, knuckles marked by old injuries that had healed crooked. His face bore the deep lines of someone who had squinted into too many sunrises, weathered too many storms. There was a heaviness in his shoulders that spoke of burdens carried alone for too long. "Why do you live out here?" she asked suddenly, breaking the hours of silence. "So far from others." Clay considered the question, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Used to live closer to town," he said finally. "Had neighbors, went to church on Sundays, helped with barn raisings and harvest. Thought that's what a man was supposed to do. Be part of something bigger than himself." He paused, his jaw working as if chewing on words he wasn't sure he wanted to spit out. "Then one winter, a family moved onto the land next to mine. The Hendersons. Good people, or so I thought. They had 3 kids, and the youngest was sick, some kind of fever that wouldn't break. I rode into town through a blizzard to fetch the doctor, near froze to death doing it. Doctor saved the boy's life." Clay's voice flattened, emptied of emotion. 2 months later, Henderson accused me of stealing one of his calves. No proof, just his word against mine. Town believed him. Suddenly, I was the thief, the liar, the man not to be trusted. Shania felt something tighten in her chest, a recognition of betrayal's particular sting. "And were you?" she asked. "Did you take his calf?" Clay's head turned, his eyes meeting hers with a directness that held no room for doubt. "No," he said simply. Found out later, Henderson had sold it himself to cover a gambling debt and needed someone to blame. By then, the damage was done. Couldn't walk into town without folks crossing the street to avoid me. So I left, came out here where a man's only judged by his work and his word." They rode on in silence, the weight of his story settling between them like dust after a wind dies down. Shania understood now why he had bought her freedom, why he didn't demand anything in return. He knew what it felt like to be judged unjustly, to have your worth measured by someone else's lies, to carry the weight of accusations you couldn't disprove. In that understanding, a thread of connection formed, thin as spider silk but present nonetheless. The sun reached its peak and began its descent as they completed their circuit of the fence line and turned back toward the ranch. Shania's thighs ached from hours in the saddle, muscles protesting the unfamiliar strain, but she refused to show discomfort. Clay noticed anyway, the way he noticed most things, and slowed their pace without comment, giving her body time to adjust. When they reached a small creek cutting through a stand of willows, Clay reined in his horse and dismounted. "We'll rest here," he said, leading his gelding to the water. Shania followed suit, grateful for the chance to stretch her legs and ease the stiffness from her joints. The creek burbled over smooth stones, clear and cold, fed by springs hidden somewhere in the hills. She knelt beside it and drank deeply, the water shocking in its purity after weeks of drinking whatever stagnant pools Harlan had allowed her access to. Clay settled himself against the trunk of a willow tree, pulling his hat low over his eyes. Shania sat several yards away, her back against a sun-warmed boulder, watching the play of light through the leaves overhead. The world felt suspended in this moment, balanced between the harsh realities she had endured and the uncertain future stretching ahead. Neither good nor bad, just present, and that was something she hadn't experienced in so long it felt almost foreign. Your people, Clay said without opening his eyes. Do you have family still out there somewhere? The question wasn't prying, just curious, offered in the same straightforward way he offered everything else.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
Shania's throat tightened. She could refuse to answer, could shut him out the way she had shut out everyone since Harlan's men had attacked her village. But something about the quiet acceptance in Clay's posture, the way he asked without demanding, loosened the words from where they had been locked away. My father was killed defending our camp, she said, her voice steady despite the grief that never quite left her. My mother died of sickness 2 winters before that. I had a brother, younger, but he was taken by soldiers when they scattered our people. I do not know if he lives or where he might be. She stared at the water, watching it flow endlessly over the stones, carrying everything away piece by piece. I am what remains. Just me. Clay opened his eyes and looked at her, really looked, seeing not just the woman sitting across from him, but the weight of loss she carried, the loneliness that mirrored his own. I'm sorry, he said, and the words held genuine weight. Not empty platitude, but acknowledgement of pain that couldn't be fixed with apologies or good intentions. Shania nodded once, accepting what he offered without needing more. They sat in silence for a while longer, the creek singing its endless song, the willows whispering secrets to the wind. When they finally mounted again and rode back toward the ranch, something between them had shifted. Not dramatically, not into trust or affection, but into a mutual recognition that they were both survivors of worlds that had tried to break them and failed. It was a small thing, fragile as new ice, but it was there, and it was real. Evening found them back at the ranch, the horses unsaddled and fed, the sun painting the western sky in shades of amber and crimson. Clay built a fire in the cabin stove and set about making a simple meal: beans and salt pork, biscuits baked in a Dutch oven, coffee strong enough to strip paint. He moved with the ease of long practice, and when he set a plate outside the cabin door for Shania, he did it without ceremony, just left it there and went back inside. Shania took the plate to the barn, where she had chosen to sleep again, and ate slowly, savoring flavors that weren't tainted by fear or humiliation. Through the barn's open door, she could see the cabin's window glowing with firelight, Clay's shadow moving across it as he cleaned up from the meal. It looked warm in there, safe, but she wasn't ready for walls yet, wasn't ready to give up the illusion of freedom that open space provided. Later, as darkness settled over the land and stars began to prick through the deepening blue, Shania heard Clay's footsteps approaching the barn. She tensed, old fears rising, but he stopped outside the door and didn't enter. There's more blankets if you need them, he called out. Gets cold out here at night. Then his footsteps retreated, giving her the space she needed, the respect she had been denied for too long. Shania pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and lay back in the hay, staring up at the barn's rafters where shadows danced in the faint moonlight filtering through cracks in the roof. For the first time since Harlan had taken everything from her, she felt something other than rage or despair. It wasn't hope, not yet, that was too much to ask. But it was the absence of immediate fear, the possibility that tomorrow might not be worse than today, and that was enough. Outside, a coyote called from the hills, its voice rising and falling in wild song. Another answered from farther away, their voices weaving together in ancient conversation. Shania closed her eyes and listened, letting the sound carry her toward sleep, toward the small mercy of darkness that held no chains, no Harlan Grimes, no betrayal. Just the night, vast and indifferent, and somewhere in it, the quiet presence of a man who had bought her freedom and asked for nothing in return. The days began to blur together in a way that felt less like captivity and more like rhythm. Shania woke each morning to the sound of Clay already moving about the ranch, tending to tasks that never seemed to end, but but were approached with the same steady patience. She found herself rising earlier, stepping out of the barn before the sun fully crested the hills. Drawn by something she couldn't quite name, curiosity perhaps, or the simple human need to be part of something rather than always apart from it. On the 5th morning, she found Clay kneeling beside the vegetable garden, pulling weeds from between rows of struggling bean plants. The soil was poor, sandy, and starved for nutrients, and the plants looked more defeated than thriving. Shania watched him work for a moment, then moved closer, crouching down to examine the earth. She scooped up a handful and let it sift through her fingers, feeling its texture, its dryness, its unwillingness to hold life. "This ground is dead," she said bluntly. Clay sat back on his heels, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "Tell me something I don't know," he replied, but there was no bitterness in his voice, just resignation. "Tried manure, tried watering twice a day, tried praying. Nothing seems to help much." Shania stood and surveyed the garden with a critical eye, seeing not just what was there, but what could be. "My people knew how to make stubborn earth remember how to give," she said. "You need ash from your fires, spread thick. And fish bones if you can get them, crushed fine and mixed deep. The land will respond, but slowly. It must learn to trust again, like anything that has been beaten." She looked at Clay directly. "You have fish bones?" Clay shook his head. "No fish for 50 miles in any direction. But I've got plenty of ash, and there's a turkey I shot yesterday that I haven't cleaned yet." "Bones from that work?" Shania considered, then nodded. "It will help. Not as strong as fish, but better than nothing." Without waiting for his response, she walked toward the small shed where he kept tools and supplies, rummaging until she found a rusted bucket and a worn spade. Clay watched her with something that might have been surprise, or might have been the beginning of trust. It was hard to tell which. He stood and brushed dirt from his knees, then moved to help without being asked. They worked side by side through the morning, Clay fetching ash from the stove while Shania broke up the compacted soil with methodical strikes of the spade. When he brought out the turkey carcass, she showed him how to separate the bones and crush them using 2 flat rocks, grinding them into fragments that would feed the earth slowly over time. Her hands moved with practiced confidence, muscle memory from a life that felt both distant and immediate. And Clay followed her lead without question. By midday, they had worked ash and bone meal into 3 full rows of the garden, their hands stained gray and their backs aching from the labor. Shania straightened and surveyed their work, a flicker of satisfaction crossing her face. "Now we wait," she said. "The earth will decide if it wants to remember." Clay nodded, studying the amended soil as if he could will it to produce. "How long did your people wait before they knew if it would work?" he asked. "Sometimes a moon," Shania replied. "Sometimes longer. Patience is the price of coaxing life from unwilling ground." She walked to the well and drew water, drinking deeply before splashing handfuls over her face and arms, washing away the ash and sweat. Clay did the same, and for a moment they stood in companionable silence. 2 people who had labored together toward a shared purpose. However small, that afternoon, Clay announced he needed to ride into town for supplies. Flour and coffee and nails for repairs he'd been putting off. Shania felt her stomach tighten at the mention of town, at the thought of other people, other eyes, other men who might look at her the way Harlan had. Clay must have seen something change in her expression because he stopped checking his saddlebags and turned to face her fully. "You don't have to come," he said. "And I won't be gone long, few hours at most. But if you want to come, you can. I won't let anyone bother you." The words were simple, stated as fact rather than promise, and something about that directness made them more believable than any elaborate assurance could have been. Shania weighed her options, staying here alone in unfamiliar territory or facing whatever waited in town with Clay beside her. "I will come," she decided. Clay nodded and retrieved the smaller saddle, the one that had belonged to his sister, and prepared the gray mare. They rode south toward town as the sun angled lower, painting the grasslands in shades of gold and copper. The journey took over an hour, and neither of them spoke much. But the silence felt different now, less guarded. More like two people comfortable enough not to fill every moment with words. The town of Copper Bend appeared gradually, first as a smudge of buildings on the horizon, then resolving into a main street lined with weathered storefronts. A saloon with peeling paint, a church with a crooked steeple, a general store that looked like it had been standing since before anyone could remember. A handful of people moved about their business, stopping to stare as Clay and Shania rode past. The stares weren't hostile exactly, just curious. The way small-town people looked at anything unfamiliar. Clay tied their horses outside the general store and turned to Shania. "I'll be quick," he said. "You can wait out here or come inside, whatever suits you." Shania dismounted and followed him in, unwilling to stand alone on the street where she would be even more exposed to scrutiny. The store's interior was dim and crowded with goods stacked on shelves that reached toward a low ceiling. The air thick with the smell of leather and tobacco and salt pork. The man behind the counter looked up as they entered, his eyes sliding from Clay to Shania and back again. "Stryker," he said, his tone neutral. "Didn't expect to see you in town this week." Clay nodded in greeting. "Need to restock a few things, Harper. Flour, coffee, box of nails if you've got them." Harper moved to gather the items, his gaze flicking repeatedly toward Shania, as if trying to solve a puzzle he hadn't been given all the pieces to. "This your wife?" Harper asked with the bluntness of someone who felt entitled to answers. Clay's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "This is Shania," he said, offering no further explanation. "She's staying at my ranch." Harper's eyebrows rose, but whatever he was thinking stayed behind his teeth. He wrapped the supplies in brown paper and tied them with twine, his movements efficient despite his obvious curiosity. As Clay counted out coins to pay, the door opened behind them and 3 men entered, their boots heavy on the wooden floor. Shania turned instinctively, her body tensing as she recognized the type, even if not the specific faces. Drifters, men who moved through the world, taking what they wanted and leaving wreckage in their wake. The tallest one, with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, let his gaze linger on Shania with an assessment that made her skin crawl. "Well now," Scarface drawled, "what do we have here? Don't see many Comanche women in town these days. Most of them got rounded up and moved on." He stepped closer, invading the space between them with deliberate aggression. "You belong to someone, sweetheart, or are you available for negotiation?" His companions laughed, the sound ugly and expectant. Clay moved before Shania could react, positioning himself between her and the stranger with a fluid economy of motion that spoke of experience with confrontation. "She's with me," Clay said, his voice dropping to a register that carried warning. "And she's not interested in conversation." Scarface's grin widened, showing teeth stained yellow from tobacco. "Didn't ask you, friend. Asked the lady." Shania felt rage flare hot in her chest, the same rage that had kept her alive through weeks of captivity, that had prevented her from breaking when Harlan's men had tried to strip away everything that made her human. She stepped around Clay, meeting Scarface's leer with eyes that promised violence. "I belong to no man," she said, her voice cold as winter wind. "And if you touch me, you will lose the hand you use." The store went silent. Even Harper stopped moving, watching the standoff with the wary attention of someone who knew violence when he saw it brewing. Scarface's grin faltered, replaced by something harder, more dangerous. His hand drifted toward the pistol at his hip. Clay's hand was already there, resting casually on his own weapon, his posture relaxed but ready. "Seems like the lady made herself clear," Clay said quietly. "Now you've got a choice. You can walk away and we'll all forget this happened, or you can keep pushing and find out what comes next. I'm fine with either." His eyes held Scarface's without blinking, and in that moment, Shania saw what she had only glimpsed before. Clay Stryker was not a man who avoided trouble out of fear, but out of a weariness with the world's endless capacity for stupidity. Scarface calculated, his gaze moving between Clay's ready stance and Shania's unwavering glare. Whatever he saw there convinced him the prize wasn't worth the price. He stepped back, hands rising in mock surrender. "No offense meant," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Just making conversation." He jerked his head toward his companions, and they filed out, their departure marked by muttered curses and the slam of the door. Clay exhaled slowly, his hand dropping from his pistol. He turned to Shania, his eyes searching her face. "You all right?" She nodded once, her heart still racing but her exterior calm. "I have handled worse," she said, and it was true, though the encounter had scraped against wounds still too fresh to have fully scarred. Clay gathered their supplies and led the way outside, where the afternoon sun felt too bright after the store's dimness. They mounted their horses and rode out of Copper Bend without speaking, the town shrinking behind them until it disappeared into the landscape's folds. Only when they were well clear did Clay break the silence. "I'm sorry," he said. "Should have known better than to bring you into town. People can be ugly when they think they're entitled to something." Shania glanced at him, surprised by the apology. "You did not make them ugly," she replied. "They came that way. You stood between them and me. That is not nothing." Clay's jaw worked as if chewing on words he wasn't sure how to shape. "Still," he said finally, "you shouldn't have to face that kind of disrespect." Shania guided her horse closer to his, near enough that their stirrups almost brushed. "I have faced far worse with no one standing beside me," she said. "Today, someone did. That makes it different." The words hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than their simple construction suggested. Clay met her gaze, and something unspoken passed between them. An acknowledgement that the distance between strangers had narrowed into something else. Not friendship yet, but the foundation upon which friendship might eventually be built. They rode on as the sun descended, painting their shadows long across the prairie grass. When they reached the ranch, dusk had settled into the hollows and draws, softening the harsh edges of daylight into something gentler. Clay unsaddled the horses while Shania carried the supplies into the cabin, moving through the space with a familiarity that had developed without her quite noticing. She set the flour and coffee on the shelf, stacked the nails in a wooden box, then paused, looking around the cabin with new eyes. It was sparse, yes, but not unloved. The table's surface was worn smooth by years of use, the stove blackened by countless fires, the floorboards creaked but were swept clean. This was a home built by someone who valued function over decoration, but who still took care with what he had. Shania found herself wondering what it would feel like to have a place like this. Not as a guest or a temporary refuge, but as something that belonged to her. Clay entered carrying the saddles, which he hung on pegs near the door. He glanced at Shania standing in the middle of his cabin, saw something in her expression that made him pause. "You're welcome to sleep inside if you want," he offered. "I can take the barn, give you privacy." The suggestion was so unexpected that Shania didn't respond immediately, just stared at him as if he had spoken in a language she didn't quite understand. "Why would you give up your own home?" she asked. Clay shrugged, the gesture self-conscious. "Because maybe you're tired of sleeping in a barn," he said simply. "And because a man can sleep just about anywhere if he's tired enough." He moved to gather blankets from a chest in the corner, preparing to make good on his offer. But Shania's voice stopped him. "No," she said. The word came out sharper than she intended, so she softened it. "I mean, that is not necessary. The barn is acceptable." What she didn't say, what she couldn't quite articulate, was that accepting his offer felt like crossing a line she wasn't ready to cross. like admitting a vulnerability she had spent weeks armoring herself against. The barn was neutral ground, neither his nor hers, just a space she occupied without obligation. Clay nodded, understanding or at least accepting what she couldn't explain. "Offer stands whenever you want it," he said, returning the blankets to the chest. He moved to the stove and began preparing a simple supper, beans and cornbread, the kind of meal that required little thought, but filled the belly. Shania watched him work, noting the efficiency of his movements, the way he never wasted motion or ingredient. They ate together at the table, a first for them. The barn's distance finally feeling unnecessary, at least for the duration of a meal. Clay didn't press conversation, just ate steadily and offered her more when her plate emptied. The cornbread was dense and slightly sweet, the beans flavored with salt pork and wild onions he must have gathered from somewhere. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest food, prepared with care. When the meal finished and darkness pressed against the windows, Shania helped clear the dishes without being asked, carrying them to the basin and washing them with water heated on the stove. Clay dried them with a worn cloth, and they worked in synchronized silence, the domestic ritual feeling strangely natural despite how foreign it should have been. When the last dish was put away, Shania moved toward the door, ready to retreat to the barn's familiar isolation. "Shania," Clay said, his voice stopping her at the threshold. She turned, one hand on the doorframe, waiting. He seemed to struggle with what he wanted to say, his brow furrowing as he searched for words. "What you did today, standing up to that man in the store, that took courage. More than most people have." His eyes met hers across the dim room. "I want you to know I see that. I see you." The words struck something deep inside her, a place that had been neglected and denied for so long she had almost forgotten it existed. To be seen, truly seen, not as property or prize or problem, but as a person with her own strength and agency. It was a gift more valuable than gold, more precious than freedom itself, because freedom without recognition was just another form of invisibility. Her throat tightened with emotions she had no names for. "You stood beside me when you did not have to," she replied, her voice rough with feelings she couldn't quite suppress. "That is not nothing either." For a long moment they simply looked at each other across the cabin's modest space, two wounded souls recognizing in each other something rare and worth protecting. Then Shania turned and stepped out into the night, closing the door softly behind her. She walked to the barn through darkness painted silver by a moon 3/4 full, the air cool and sharp with the scent of sage. Inside, she settled into her usual spot in the hay, pulling blankets around her shoulders, but sleep didn't come easily. Her mind kept returning to the day's events, to the way Clay had positioned himself between her and danger without hesitation, to the quiet respect he offered without demanding anything in return. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called, its voice both mournful and beautiful. Shania listened to it, letting the sound anchor her in the present moment, rather than drifting back into the past's darker waters. Tomorrow the sun would rise again, and there would be work to do, earth to tend, fences to mend, the simple daily tasks that built a life one careful stone at a time. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she found herself looking forward to tomorrow rather than simply dreading it. 3 weeks passed like water flowing over stone, slow but persistent, wearing away the sharp edges of distrust until what remained was something smoother, more navigable. The garden showed its first real signs of transformation, bean plants lifting their leaves toward the sun with renewed vigor, the soil darkening as it remembered how to hold moisture and nurture roots. Shania checked the plants each morning, her fingers gentle against the tender shoots. And Clay would watch from wherever he was working. A slight upward curve to his mouth that wasn't quite a smile but suggested the possibility of one. The rhythm of ranch life became familiar in ways that both comforted and unsettled her. She learned which hinge on the barn door squeaked loudest, Which horse preferred to be brushed on the left side first? How Clay took his coffee in the morning. Strong and black with 2 careful sips before he set the cup down to cool. Small details that meant nothing and everything. The architecture of daily existence that built itself around 2 people, learning to occupy the same space without collision. On a morning that dawned clear and unusually cool for late summer, Clay announced he needed to ride to the far pasture to check on the cattle he kept there, a journey that would take most of the day. Shania had accompanied him on shorter trips, but this one required crossing rougher terrain, threading through canyon country where the land broke into fractured stone and hidden arroyos. He saddled both horses out of habit, then paused, glancing toward where Shania stood watching from the corral fence. "This ride's harder than the others," he said. "Rocky ground, some steep climbs. You're welcome to come, but it'll test you." There was no challenge in his voice, just honest assessment. Shania lifted her chin, that familiar flash of defiance lighting her eyes. "I have ridden through worse," she said. "Comanche children learn to ride before they learn to walk properly. Your rocky ground does not frighten me." Clay's mouth twitched, almost smiling. "Didn't figure it would," he replied, handing her the gray mare's reins. They set out as the sun climbed higher, leaving the ranch behind as they headed northwest toward country that grew progressively wilder. The grasslands gave way to broken terrain studded with juniper and pinyon pine, the earth rising and falling in unpredictable waves that forced them to pick their path carefully. The silence between them had evolved into something companionable, no longer weighted with suspicion or the need to fill empty space with meaningless words. They rode single file where the trail narrowed, Clay leading because he knew the country, Shania following but alert, her eyes constantly scanning the landscape with the ingrained vigilance of someone whose survival had once depended on noticing everything. She saw the hawk circling before Clay did, saw the way the horse's ears swiveled toward a sound she couldn't yet hear, saw the track in the dust that spoke of something large passing through recently. They reached the pasture by midday, a bowl of grassland cupped between red stone walls that rose like fortress ramparts on 3 sides. Clay's cattle, perhaps 30 head, grazed peacefully, scattered across the meadow in loose groups. He dismounted and walked among them, counting heads, checking for injuries or signs of illness with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this countless times. Shania stayed mounted, her gaze drawn not to the cattle but to the canyon walls, to the way shadows pooled in their crevices, to the feeling of being watched that prickled at the back of her neck. "Something wrong?" Clay called, noticing her attention had shifted away from the herd. Shania frowned, trying to identify what her instincts were warning her about. "I do not know," she said slowly. "The land feels wrong. Too quiet." Clay straightened, his own senses sharpening as he surveyed their surroundings. The cattle continued grazing, undisturbed, and no obvious threat presented itself, but he had learned over the years to trust that feeling when it came. That animal awareness of danger lurking just beyond perception's edge. He moved back to his horse and withdrew his rifle from its scabbard, checking that it was loaded. "Could be nothing," he said, "but let's not take chances." They rode the perimeter of the pasture together, eyes scanning the canyon walls and the scrub-choked draws that fed into the meadow. Shania's hand rested on the knife she wore at her belt, a blade Clay had given her the week before without ceremony. Just set it on the table one morning and said, "Everyone should have a way to protect themselves." They found the tracks near the eastern edge of the pasture, where a narrow gap in the canyon wall created a natural passage. Boot prints, 3 sets, possibly 4, recent enough that dust hadn't yet fully settled back into the depressions. Clay dismounted and knelt beside them, his jaw tightening as he read what the ground told him. "Rustlers," he said flatly. "Been watching the herd, figuring out the best time to move in." He stood, scanning the canyon rim with narrowed eyes. They might still be close. Shania felt ice slide down her spine, Not from fear, but from the sudden clarity of purpose that came with confirmed danger. "How many cattle have they taken?" she asked. Clay moved among the herd again, counting more carefully this time, and his face darkened. "3," he said. "Took them sometime in the last 2 days, probably at night when the moon was down." His hands curled into fists. "Should have checked sooner." "You cannot be everywhere at once," Shania said, guiding her horse closer. "The land is too large, and you are only one man." Clay shook his head, anger directed inward rather than out.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story.
"Those 3 head represent money I don't have to lose. Losing cattle means going without supplies, means the difference between making it through winter or not." He exhaled harshly. "Can't afford to let them take more." They spent the next hour searching for additional sign, following the rustler's trail as it wound through the canyon toward the north. The tracks led to a box canyon Clay knew well, a dead-end pocket with high walls and only one way in or out. It was exactly the kind of place desperate or foolish men would choose to hide stolen cattle, assuming they could defend the narrow entrance if discovered. Clay reined in his horse and studied the canyon mouth from a distance, his expression grim. "They're probably in there," he said. 3 or 4 men armed, and they know we're coming, or they will soon enough." He looked at Shania. "You should head back to the ranch. This isn't your fight, and I won't risk you getting caught in the middle of it." Shania's eyes flashed. "I did not ride all this way to turn back when there is trouble," she said. "And you said yourself, they are multiple men. You will need someone watching your back." Clay wanted to argue. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the protective instinct warring with the practical knowledge that she was right. He was one man facing unknown odds, and pride was a poor shield against bullets. Finally, he nodded. "Stay behind me," he said. "And if shooting starts, you get clear and ride hard for the ranch. Don't look back, don't try to help, just go." "Understood?" Shania didn't answer, which was answer enough. They approached the canyon entrance cautiously, dismounting 50 yards out and leading their horses on foot to muffle the sound of hooves on stone. The afternoon sun slanted across the canyon walls, creating stark contrasts of light and shadow that made it difficult to see into the deeper recesses. Clay moved with the careful deliberation of someone who understood that mistakes in moments like this were permanent. Shania matched his pace, her breathing controlled. Her mind sharp and clear, the narrow entrance opened into a wider space. And there, in the afternoon shadows, Clay's 3 missing cattle stood hobbled and nervous. 4 men sat around a small fire, their attention divided between cooking whatever was in the blackened pot and an argument about how much they could get for the stolen stock. They were weathered and dangerous looking, the kind of men who survived by taking what others built. Parasites on the edges of civilization. Clay raised his rifle, his voice cutting across the canyon like a whip crack. "Those cattle belong to me," he called out. "You've got one chance to walk away from this. Take it." The 4 men scrambled to their feet, hands dropping toward weapons. The tallest one, with a face like weathered leather and eyes too close together, spat into the dirt. "Mister, there's 4 of us and 1 of you. I don't like them odds for you." "2 of us," Shania said, stepping into view with her knife drawn. The blade caught the light, flashing like a promise. The men's eyes widened slightly at the sight of her, calculations shifting. Clay's rifle never wavered, trained on the tall man's chest. "Last chance," Clay said. "Ride out now, or we settle this the hard way." The tension stretched like a wire pulled too tight. Everyone frozen in the moment, before violence. When choices narrowed to binary options, fight or flee, one of the younger rustlers, barely more than a boy, broke first. He backed toward the horses tied at the canyon's rear, hands raised. "This ain't worth dying over," he said, his voice cracking. He mounted quickly and spurred his horse toward the canyon entrance, not looking back. The tall man cursed but didn't stop him. His hand hovered near his pistol, pride and survival wrestling for control. The standoff might have ended there, might have resolved into retreat and grudging survival. But the man to the tall one's left, drunk or stupid or both, made his choice. His hand moved for his gun, clearing leather in a motion practiced but not quite fast enough. Clay's rifle barked once, the sound enormous in the confined space, and the man spun backward, his weapon flying from nerveless fingers as he collapsed into the dirt. Chaos erupted. The remaining rustlers drew their weapons as Clay levered another round into the chamber. Shania moved without thinking, pure instinct driving her forward as one of the men turned his pistol toward Clay's unprotected side. She closed the distance in 3 running strides and drove her knife upward, finding the soft flesh beneath the man's ribs with brutal precision. His gun discharged into the ground as he folded, and Shania yanked her blade free. Already turning toward the next threat, the tall man fired, his bullet chipping stone near Clay's head. But Clay's return shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him halfway around. The 4th rustler, seeing his companions down and the fight turned impossible, threw his pistol aside and raised his hands. "Don't shoot," he gasped. I'm done. Clay kept his rifle trained on him, his breathing hard, his face carved from stone. "Get your friends and get out," Clay ordered, his voice deadly calm. "Take them to a doctor if you can, leave them if you can't. But if I ever see any of you near my land again, I won't offer a second chance." The tall man, clutching his bleeding shoulder, nodded jerkily. Between him and the remaining rustler, they managed to get the wounded man onto a horse. Then mounted their own and rode out of the canyon at a pace that bordered on panic. Silence crashed back in, broken only by the restless shifting of Clay's cattle and the ragged sound of breathing. Clay lowered his rifle slowly, his hands shaking now that the danger had passed, adrenaline burning through him like wildfire. He turned to Shania, his eyes wide. "You killed him," he said, not accusation but statement of fact that seemed to require acknowledgement. Shania looked down at the body, at the blood staining her knife in her hands, at the life she had taken to preserve another. "Yes," she said simply. "He would have killed you." There was no remorse in her voice, no satisfaction either, just the flat acceptance of someone who had done what survival required. She walked to the canyon's small stream and knelt, washing the blood from her hands and blade with methodical care. Clay moved to check the dead rustler, confirming what was already obvious, then covered the body with a saddle blanket they had left behind. "We'll report this to the marshal in Copper Bend," he said. "Make sure it's recorded proper, self-defense. Protection of property." He retrieved his cattle, cutting their hobbles, herding them toward the canyon entrance where they could be moved back to the main pasture. They worked in silence, shock and exhaustion settling over both of them like heavy blankets. By the time they had the cattle moving and started the long ride back, the sun was already descending, painting the canyon walls in shades of blood and copper. Shania rode beside Clay rather than behind him, close enough that their stirrups occasionally brushed, and neither pulled away from the contact. "You saved my life," Clay said finally, his voice rough. "That man had me dead to rights, and you stopped him." Shania didn't look at him, keeping her eyes on the trail ahead. "You saved mine first," she replied. "At the trading ground when you bought my freedom. This makes us even." But they both knew it was more complicated than simple reciprocation, that what had happened in the canyon had forged a bond deeper than transaction or obligation. They rode through twilight, through the gathering darkness that turned the landscape into shapes and shadows. When they finally reached the ranch, both of them were bone-tired, muscles aching, minds still processing what had occurred. Clay tended the horses while Shania stood in the yard, staring at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. as if the blood she had washed away might still be visible to eyes that knew where to look. Clay emerged from the barn and stopped beside her, close enough that she could feel his presence like warmth against her side. "You did what needed doing," he said quietly. "Don't carry it as sin when it was survival." Shania turned to face him, seeing in his eyes an understanding born from his own experiences, his own necessary violences committed in the name of protecting what mattered. "I am not sorry I killed him," she said, needing him to understand. "I am only tired of a world that demands killing to earn the right to live." Clay nodded slowly. "I know," he replied. "I'm tired of it too." They stood together in the darkness, two people who had fought and bled and survived, the distance between them shrinking to nothing as exhaustion and shared trauma dissolved the last barriers of careful separation. Clay's hand found hers, rough calluses against rough calluses, and Shania let him hold it, let herself be anchored by the simple human contact that asked for nothing but offered everything. Above them, stars emerged one by one, indifferent witnesses to the small drama of human connection playing out beneath their ancient light. Neither spoke, neither moved away, and in that silence something fundamental shifted. Recognition crystallizing into something that would be impossible to unmake. The morning after the canyon confrontation arrived wrapped in fog, unusual for this country. The kind of thick gray blanket that muffled sound and turned the world into something uncertain and dreamlike. Shania woke in the barn to find the air heavy with moisture, droplets clinging to the spider webs strung between the rafters like strings of glass beads. She rose stiffly, muscles protesting yesterday's violence, and stepped outside to find the ranch transformed into a landscape of ghosts and shadows. Clay was already awake, standing near the corral with his hands wrapped around a tin cup, staring into the fog as if it held answers to questions he hadn't yet learned how to ask. He turned when he heard her approach, and something in his expression had changed overnight, a guardedness worn away to reveal something raw and undefended beneath. "Didn't sleep much," he said by way of greeting. Shania nodded, understanding in her bones what nightmares looked like when they wore a man's face in daylight. "Neither did I," she admitted, moving to stand beside him. The fog pressed close around them, creating an intimacy of isolation, as if they were the only two people left in a world that had dissolved into gray nothing. Clay poured coffee from the pot he had brought outside, handing her a cup without asking if she wanted it. She accepted, wrapping her fingers around the warmth, letting the bitter steam rise into her face. "I rode to town before dawn," Clay said quietly. "Reported what happened to Marshal Keegan. He's sending a deputy out to the canyon to collect the body, document the scene." He paused, his jaw working. "Asked me a lot of questions about you, about why you were there, what your part was in the shooting." Shania's spine stiffened, old fears rising like specters in the fog. "What did you tell him?" "Told him the truth," Clay replied, meeting her eyes. "That you were with me, that one of them tried to kill me and you stopped him, that it was self-defense clear as daylight." His voice carried an edge of protective anger. "Keegan didn't like it much, me having a Comanche woman at my ranch, involved in a killing. He made that plain. But the law's the law, and what happened was justified, no matter who swung the knife." Shania felt something loosen in her chest, tension she hadn't realized she was carrying. "You could have told him I was not there," she said. "Made it simpler for yourself." Clay shook his head. "I don't lie, not even to make things easier. You were there, you saved my life, and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly." The fierce simplicity of his loyalty struck her like a physical thing. Overwhelming in its steadfastness, they stood in silence, drinking coffee and watching the fog begin to thin as the sun climbed higher, burning through the gray in uneven patches. When Clay finally spoke again, his voice carried a weight that suggested he had been building toward these words all morning. "I've been thinking about something," he said. "About what happened yesterday. about how close it came to going different. He turned to face her fully. I don't want you in danger because of me, because of this ranch, because of anything I bring into your life. You've had enough of that. Shania frowned, trying to understand where his words were leading. You think I cannot handle danger? She asked, an edge of challenge in her voice. I proved yesterday I can stand and fight. Clay's expression shifted, frustration and something deeper tangling together. That's not what I mean, he said. I know you can fight. God knows you proved that. What I mean is you shouldn't have to, not anymore. Not for me or my cattle or my problems. Then what are you saying? Shania pressed, her heart beginning to beat faster for reasons she couldn't quite name. Clay set his cup down on the fence post, his hands curling into fists before deliberately relaxing. I'm saying maybe you should move on, he said, each word clearly costing him. Go somewhere safer, somewhere you're not tied to a man who attracts trouble. I have some money saved, enough to get you to California or Oregon. Someplace you could start fresh without the weight of everything that's happened here. The words hit Shania like cold water, shocking in their unexpectedness. For a moment she couldn't speak, couldn't process what he was offering or why it felt like rejection even though his face showed nothing but concern. You want me to leave, she said flatly, testing the truth of it. Clay's jaw tightened. I want you safe, he corrected. There's a difference. No, Shania said, the word coming out harder than she intended. There is no difference. You speak of my safety while sending me away into a world I do not know, to places where I have no one, nothing. She stepped closer, anger and hurt warring in her chest. You think I am safer alone than here. You think I want to run again, to be a stranger among strangers, to rebuild from emptiness one more time? Her voice rose despite her efforts to control it. I am tired of running, Clay Stryker. I am tired of having no ground beneath my feet that I can call mine. Clay looked stricken, his careful walls crumbling as her words hammered against them. I'm trying to do right by you, he said, his voice rough. After everything you've been through, you deserve better than a hardscrabble ranch and a man who brings violence to your door. Shania grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her, to see her. You do not decide what I deserve, she said fiercely. I decide. And what I want is to stay here, to tend the garden we planted together, to ride these hills, to sleep in that barn knowing tomorrow will come and I will still be here. Her fingers tightened on his sleeve. Unless you truly want me gone, unless this is your way of saying I am a burden you no longer wish to carry. God, no, Clay said, the words bursting out of him with startling vehemence. You're not a burden, you're... He stopped, struggling with something too large to name easily. You're the first thing that's felt right in this place since I built it. The first person who didn't want something from me I couldn't give. When I wake up and hear you moving around outside, when I see you in the garden or riding beside me, it feels like this ranch finally has a purpose beyond just surviving another season. Shania released his arm, her anger draining away as quickly as it had risen, replaced by something more complicated, more frightening in its vulnerability. Then why send me away? She asked quietly. Clay ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. Because yesterday scared me, he admitted. Watching that man aim at me, knowing I was about to die, that was one thing. But seeing you step into danger, seeing you take a life to protect mine, that terror was different, sharper, more unbearable. He met her eyes. I can accept dying for my own choices, but I can't accept you dying for them. Understanding bloomed in Shania's chest, painful and profound. You care what happens to me, she said, not quite a question. Clay's laugh was short and bitter. Of course I care, he said. How could I not? The admission hung between them, raw and exposed, changing the shape of everything that had come before. Shania felt her throat tighten with emotions she had kept locked away for so long. They felt foreign when they finally surfaced. I killed that man not because you asked me to, she said slowly, working through thoughts that had kept her awake through the long night. Not because I owed you or because I had no choice. I killed him because the thought of you dying, of you being taken from this world, was unbearable to me. She paused, gathering courage for the next words. Because somewhere between the trading ground and yesterday, you stopped being the stranger who bought my freedom and became the person I choose to stand beside. Clay's breath caught audibly. The fog had thinned enough now that she could see his face clearly, see the way her words affected him. The careful control he maintained cracking to reveal the loneliness and longing he had been living with for years. Shania, he said, her name rough in his mouth. I don't want to ask more from you than you're willing to give. You've had too many people taking from you already. Then do not ask, Shania replied, stepping closer until only inches separated them. Just tell me the truth. Do you want me to stay? Clay's hands came up slowly, hovering near her arms as if afraid to touch, afraid his wanting might somehow taint what was offered. Yes, he said, the word barely more than a breath. I want you to stay more than I've wanted anything in a long time. But I need you to understand what that means. This life is hard, the winters are brutal, the work never ends, and there will be more trouble, more danger. I can't promise you safety or comfort, or... Shania placed her fingers against his lips, silencing him. I do not want promises you cannot keep, she said. I want only this, to be here, to build something with my own hands, to stand beside someone who sees me as I am and does not turn away. She lowered her hand. Can you give me that? Clay's hands finally completed their journey, coming to rest on her arms, warm and solid and sure. Yes, he said. I can give you that. The kiss happened without conscious decision from either of them, drawn together by gravity that had been building for weeks, a collision that was somehow also a homecoming. Clay's lips were chapped and gentle, asking rather than demanding, and Shania answered by pressing closer, her hands finding the solid warmth of his chest, his shoulders, his neck. The kiss deepened, weeks of loneliness and careful distance dissolving into shared heat and need, and the profound relief of finally allowing yourself to want something. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clay rested his forehead against hers, his hands cupping her face with a tenderness that made her chest ache. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. It's been so long since I let anyone close. I've forgotten the shape of it. Shania's fingers traced the line of his jaw, rough with morning stubble. Then we learn together, she said. Neither of us knows how this ends. But we know how it begins, here, now with choosing each other. Clay pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in an embrace that felt like shelter and promise combined. Shania let herself lean into him, let herself accept the support of another person without fearing it would be yanked away, used against her, turned into another chain. They stood like that for a long time, the fog continuing to burn away around them, revealing the ranch in all its rough beauty, the land they would tend together, the life they would build from the wreckage of their separate pasts. Eventually, practical necessities reasserted themselves. The horses needed feeding, the garden required watering, the endless cycle of ranch work waited for no one's romantic revelations. But everything felt different now, charged with new meaning. When Clay's hand found hers as they walked toward the barn, it felt natural, right, as if their fingers had been designed to fit together. When Shania caught him watching her as she worked in the garden, the look on his face was no longer carefully neutral but openly warm. And she found herself smiling back without guarding the expression. That afternoon, as they worked to repair a section of corral fence damaged by one of the horses kicking through it, Clay paused in his hammering to look at her. There's something I need to say, he started, then seemed to struggle with how to continue. Shania set down the board she was holding and gave him her full attention. When I bought you from Harlan Grimes, he said slowly, I told myself I was just doing a decent thing, helping someone who needed help. But that wasn't the whole truth. What was the whole truth? Shania asked, genuinely curious. Clay hammered another nail before answering, buying himself time. The whole truth is I looked at you standing there, defiant and unbroken despite everything they'd done to you, and I saw something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope, maybe, or just proof that some things can't be destroyed, no matter how hard the world tries. I needed to see you free because it felt like proof that redemption was still possible, even out here in this hard country. Shania absorbed this, understanding better now the complicated tangle of motivations that had driven his actions. And now? She asked. What do you see when you look at me now? Clay set down his hammer and turned to face her fully, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. Now I see home, he said simply. I see the person who makes this place feel like more than just a spot on a map where I happen to survive. I see my future if you'll let me be part of yours. The words should have frightened her, should have triggered all her carefully constructed defenses against vulnerability and dependence. Instead, they settled into her chest like warmth spreading from a fire, chasing away cold she hadn't even realized she was carrying. Yes, she said, the word easy and certain. You can be part of my future, Clay Striker. And I will be part of yours. She picked up the board again, positioning it against the fence post. Now hammer this nail before the horse kicks through another section. Clay laughed, the sound genuine and unburdened. And Shania realized it was the first time she had heard him laugh like that, without weight or reservation. The sound made her smile despite herself, made something inside her unfurl like a flower toward sun. They worked through the afternoon, their movements synchronized, their conversation ranging from practical matters to deeper subjects, testing the boundaries of this new understanding they had reached. As evening approached, and they finished their tasks, Clay surprised her by leading her not toward the cabin or barn, but toward a spot behind the ranch house, where a flat expanse of rock jutted from the hillside. I come here sometimes, he said, when I need to think or just remind myself why I chose this life. They climbed onto the rock and sat side by side, legs dangling over the edge, watching the sun descend toward the western horizon. The sky transformed into a canvas of impossible colors, oranges and purples and reds that seemed too vivid to be real, painting the landscape below in shades of gold and shadow. Shania had seen countless sunsets in her life, but this one felt different, weighted with significance by the man sitting beside her, by the choices they had made, by the future they were choosing to build together. Clay's hand found hers again, and she laced her fingers through his, the gesture already familiar. My father told me once, Shania said quietly, that the sunset is the earth's way of forgiving the day for all its harshness, painting beauty over the scars so tomorrow can begin fresh. Clay squeezed her hand gently. Your father sounds like he was a wise man, he said. Shania nodded, throat tight with grief that had softened but never fully disappeared. He was, she agreed. He taught me that survival is not enough, that we must also find reasons to want to survive. Beauty is one of those reasons. What are the others? Clay asked. Shania turned to look at him, his face gilded by the dying light, strong and weathered and honest. Connection, she said. Belonging to something larger than yourself. Having someone who sees your worth when the world tells you you're worthless. She paused. You gave me those things, Clay, whether you meant to or not. You reminded me that I am more than what was done to me. More than survival and anger and fear. Clay's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin with infinite gentleness. You gave me those things too, he said. I was so busy protecting myself from being hurt again that I forgot what it felt like to actually live. You changed that. You made me remember that risk and reward are two sides of the same coin, that you can't have one without the other. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but she didn't want to. Their lips met again, softer than before, a kiss that tasted of promise and possibility. When they finally descended from the rock as full darkness settled over the land, something fundamental had shifted between them. Clay walked Shania not to the barn, but to the cabin door, pausing there with visible hesitation. "The offer still stands," he said. "You can sleep inside, have a real bed, have warmth and walls." Shania looked at the barn, then back at the cabin, weighing comfort against the safety of familiar isolation. "Not tonight," she said finally. "But soon. I need a little more time to believe this is real, that it will not be taken away when I stop watching." Clay nodded, understanding rather than judgment in his expression. "Take all the time you need," he said. "I'll be here." He leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead, chaste and sweet, then stepped back. "Sleep well, Shania." She walked to the barn through darkness thick with stars, her heart fuller than it had been in years, maybe ever. Inside, she settled into her usual spot in the hay, but this time when she closed her eyes, she did not see Harlan Grimes or the trading ground or all the ways the world had tried to break her. Instead, she saw Clay's face in sunset light, felt his hand in hers, heard his laughter ringing clear and true. For the first time since she could remember, sleep came easily, undisturbed by nightmares, guarded by the knowledge that tomorrow she would wake to possibility rather than mere survival. Autumn arrived with the subtlety of a whisper becoming a shout, the air turning crisp overnight, carrying the scent of dying grass and wood smoke. The cottonwoods along the creek began their transformation, leaves shifting from green to gold, and the morning frost painted intricate patterns on the cabin windows that melted away as the sun climbed higher. Shania stood in the garden, surveying the harvest they had gathered over the past week. Beans dried and stored, squash lined up along the porch, evidence of the earth's forgiveness made tangible. Clay emerged from the barn, carrying a saddle that needed mending, the leather cracked from years of use and weather. He paused when he saw Shania in the garden, and something in his expression softened, the perpetual guardedness he had worn for so long now absent, more often than present. "Thinking about something," he called. Shania turned, brushing dirt from her hands. "Thinking how strange it is that 3 months ago I could not have imagined standing here, in this place, feeling like I belong to it and it belongs to me." Clay set the saddle on the porch rail and walked toward her, his boots crunching on frost-brittle grass. "Does it feel real yet?" he asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Shania considered the question carefully, as she did most things worth answering. "Sometimes," she admitted. "And sometimes I wake up expecting to find chains on my wrists, to hear Harlan's voice, to discover this was just a dream my mind created to survive the nightmare." She met his eyes. "But then I see you, and the realness returns." Clay reached out and took her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them over the weeks since their confessions on the rock. "I know that feeling," he said. "The waiting for the other boot to drop, for the good thing to reveal itself as a trick. But maybe at some point we have to choose to believe in what's in front of us, even when it feels impossible." Shania squeezed his hand, drawing strength from the solid warmth of him. "Then I choose to believe," she said. The sound of approaching horses broke the moment, hoofbeats carrying across the still morning air. Both of them tensed instinctively, old habits reasserting themselves, but the riders who crested the ridge were no threat. Marshal Keegan rode in front, his silver badge catching the light. And beside him was a woman Shania had never seen before, her face weathered but kind, her posture suggesting someone comfortable in a saddle. Clay's hand moved to the rifle, leaning against the cabin wall, not lifting it but positioning himself near it. "Marshal," he greeted evenly. "Wasn't expecting visitors." Keegan dismounted, his movements stiff, a man whose body had been broken and mended too many times. "Morning, Stryker," he said. "Got some news figured you'd want to hear in person." His gaze shifted to Shania, and she read no hostility there, just assessment and something that might have been respect. Harlan Grimes was found dead 3 weeks ago, Keegan said, addressing Shania directly. Shot in a dispute over a card game in a town 50 miles south of here. Figured you'd want to know he's not a threat anymore. The news hit Shania like a physical blow. Not grief, but a sudden absence of the fear she had been carrying like a stone in her chest. He's truly dead? She asked, needing confirmation. Keegan nodded. Saw the body myself before they buried him. He's gone, Miss Shania. Whatever nightmares he gave you, they can't reach you anymore. Clay pulled Shania close, wrapping his arms around her as she absorbed the news. She didn't cry, the relief too overwhelming for tears, but she shook with the release of tension she had been holding for months. He's gone, she whispered against Clay's chest. Truly gone. Clay's hand stroked her hair, his touch gentle and grounding. You're free of him, he murmured. Completely free. He can't haunt you anymore. They stood like that until Shania's shaking subsided. Until the news settled from shock into acceptance. The woman who had ridden in with Keegan dismounted and approached with her hands visible and open. My name is Sarah Hendricks, she said, addressing both of them but focusing primarily on Shania. I run a school over in Copper Bend, teaching children whose families can't afford formal education or who aren't welcome in the regular schoolhouse. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I've been looking for someone who could teach the Comanche children. The ones who survived the relocations and ended up scattered through this territory. Shania's breath caught, surprise rendering her momentarily speechless. Sarah continued, her voice gentle but firm. Marshal Keegan told me about you. About what you've survived and what you did to protect Mr. Stryker. He thought you might be someone worth knowing. She glanced at Clay. I'm not here to take her away from you or this ranch. I'm here to offer her something that might matter to her. A way to use what she knows to help children who are lost the way she once was. Clay looked at Shania, waiting for her response, giving her the agency to decide her own path. Shania felt her mind racing, turning over possibilities she had not allowed herself to imagine. How many children? She asked Sarah, and where would this teaching happen? Sarah smiled. 11 children so far. Ages ranging from 6 to 14. The teaching would be 2 days a week in Copper Bend. The other 5 days, you'd be free to live your life however you choose. Shania turned to Clay, searching his face for any sign of resistance or resentment. What do you think? She asked, needing to hear his truth. Clay's expression was complicated, but when he spoke, his voice was steady. I think those children need what you can give them, he said. And I think you need to know you're more than just someone who survived, that you have gifts worth sharing. If you want to do this, I support it. The freedom of that choice settled over her like the first warm day after a hard winter. She turned back to Sarah. I will do it, she said. I will teach them our language, our stories, remind them they come from a proud people who survived because they were strong and clever and refused to be broken. Sarah's smile was genuine and warm. Thank you, Miss Shania. Those children need someone like you more than you probably realize. Later that day, as they worked together to prepare for the coming winter, splitting wood and checking the integrity of the barn's roof, Clay brought up something he had clearly been considering. If you're going to be teaching in town 2 days a week, he said, you'll need a proper horse, not just borrowing the mare. And you'll need warmer clothes. He paused in his work. I've got money put aside. We should use some of it to fit you properly. Shania stopped what she was doing, studying him carefully. We? She questioned. Clay set down his axe, meeting her gaze directly. We, he confirmed. I know we haven't talked about what this is between us, what we're building here, but it feels like a partnership to me. Like we're building something together that belongs to both of us. He took a breath. If that's not how you see it, tell me now. But that's where my head is. Shania felt warmth spread through her chest, the kind of warmth that came from being seen and valued and included. That is how I see it too, she said. A partnership. Something we build together. The offer hung in the air between them, weighted with implications that went beyond practical matters of shared resources. Yes, she said. I will have it, and you will have what is mine in return. We share this, all of it. That evening, Clay did something unexpected. He retrieved a small wooden box from beneath his bed, weathered and carefully maintained, and brought it outside to where Shania sat on the porch watching the sunset. He settled beside her, the box resting on his lap, and opened it slowly. Inside were objects that clearly held deep meaning. A letter in faded ink, a photograph, a pocket watch with a cracked face, and a ring, simple silver worn smooth by time. This was my mother's ring, Clay said, lifting it from the box. She gave it to my father when they married, long before I was born. After she died, he wore it on a chain around his neck until the day he passed. Then it came to me. He turned it in his fingers, light catching the worn surface. I never thought I'd have reason to offer it to anyone. Never thought I'd find someone I wanted to build a life with. He looked at Shania, vulnerability naked in his eyes. I'm offering it to you now, if you'll have it. If you'll have me. Shania's breath stopped in her chest, the enormity of what he was offering overwhelming in its simplicity and depth. You want to marry me? She asked, needing to hear him say it plainly. Clay nodded. I want to marry you, he confirmed. I want to stand before whoever will witness it and claim you as my wife, and be claimed by you in return. I want to build this life together officially, not just in practice, but in name. Shania took the ring from his hand, feeling the weight of history and promise it carried. She thought about everything that had brought her to this moment, the suffering and loss, the slow rebuilding of trust, the discovery that she could still want things beyond mere survival. She thought about the children she would teach, the garden they had coaxed back to life, the mornings waking up to Clay's presence. Yes, she said, the words simple but containing multitudes. I will marry you, Clay Stryker. I will stand beside you and build this life together, officially and in every other way. She slid the ring onto her finger, where it fit as if it had been waiting for her all along. Clay's relief and joy were evident in the way he pulled her close, kissing her with a passion tempered by tenderness, a promise sealed with touch rather than just words. They sat together as darkness fell, wrapped in each other's presence, watching stars emerge one by one across the vast sky. The land around them settled into its night rhythms, the horses shifting in their stalls, an owl calling from the cottonwoods, the wind carrying the scent of sage and coming winter. Shania leaned her head against Clay's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart through his shirt. When should we marry? Clay asked eventually. Shania considered, turning the ring on her finger. Soon, she said. Before winter comes and makes travel difficult. I want people to see that a Comanche woman and a rancher chose each other, that we built something good from broken pieces. Clay kissed her forehead. Then soon it is, he agreed. The wedding took place 3 weeks later on a crisp October morning. The sky so blue, it hurt to look at, and the air carrying the sharp clarity that came before the season's first real cold. They gathered outside the small church in Copper Bend. Shania in a dress Sarah had helped her sew, simple but beautiful. The fabric a deep blue that brought out the darkness of her eyes. Marshall Keegan stood witness along with Sarah, Hendricks and a handful of townsfolk who had come out of curiosity, but stayed because the obvious love between Clay and Shania was impossible to deny. The preacher, an old man with kind eyes and shaking hands, spoke words about commitment and partnership, about choosing to walk together through whatever came next. When he asked if they took each other, both answered with clear, unwavering voices. Clay slipped a second ring onto Shania's finger. This one knew. purchased with money he had saved. Shania placed a band on Clay's hand, when she had traded for with work she had done mending clothes for families in town. When the preacher pronounced them married, Clay kissed her as if they were the only two people in the world, and the gathered witnesses clapped with genuine warmth. The celebration afterward was modest, held at Sarah's school building, with food brought by various townspeople and music played on a fiddle. Shania found herself talking with several of the Comanche children she would be teaching, their faces lighting up when she spoke to them in their own language. Their relief at finding someone who understood palpable and heartbreaking. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them tired but content. When they arrived, Clay dismounted and helped Shania down, his hands lingering at her waist. "Welcome home, Mrs. Stryker," he said. Shania smiled. "Welcome home, Mr. Stryker," she replied. And they walked together toward the cabin, that night, for the first time. Shania slept in the cabin's bed rather than the barn, wrapped in Clay's arms. The walls no longer feeling like a trap, but like shelter she had earned the right to claim. She listened to his breathing slow and deepen into sleep, felt the weight of his arm across her waist, and marveled at how far she had come. The months that followed established new rhythms. Shania riding to town twice weekly to teach the children, returning home to help Clay with the endless work of the ranch. The children she taught grew more confident with each session, their language skills improving, their connection to their heritage strengthening under her patient guidance. Winter came with its predictable hardships. Heavy snows that trapped them inside for days at a time, temperatures that froze water solid. But they faced it together, splitting wood and tending livestock and keeping each other warm through the coldest nights. Clay built new shelves inside the cabin, and Shania filled them with dried herbs and preserved foods. The garden they had saved together flourished beyond expectations the following spring, the earth remembering how to give now that it was tended with care and respect. Clay built new sections onto the corral, and Shania helped him, learning the rhythm of hammer and nail, the satisfaction of building something with her own hands. Spring returned fully, bringing with it the promise of new growth. Shania found herself standing once again in the garden one morning, her hand resting on her belly where new life was beginning, the next chapter of their shared story taking shape. She had suspected for weeks, but had waited to be certain before speaking the truth aloud. When she told Clay that evening, as they sat together watching the sunset from their rock, his face transformed with wonder and fear in equal measure. "Are you sure?" he asked, his hand covering hers on her belly. Shania nodded, tears of joy and trepidation mingling on her cheeks. "I am sure," she said. "We are going to have a child, Clay." Clay pulled her close, his face buried in her hair, and she felt the dampness of his own tears. "I will do right by both of you," he promised. "I will be the father my own father was to me, steady and strong and present. I will teach our child how to work the land, how to treat people with respect." As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Shania and Clay stood together on their land, looking out over everything they had built and everything still to come. "Thank you," she said quietly. Clay looked at her. "For what?" Shania turned to face him. "For seeing me when I was invisible, for standing beside me, for loving me when I had forgotten how to be loved." Clay's thumb brushed across her knuckles. "You gave me those same things," he replied. "We saved each other, Shania. That's what this is." Standing there on their land, with their future stretching ahead and their past finally laid to rest, they both knew he was right. They had saved each other through patient work of showing up each day and choosing connection over isolation.
Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.